I have the pleasure of introducing Barbara Glanz for the session titled The Gift of Change, Letting Go of Exhaustion, Confusion, and Anger to Find a New Beginning. We thank you for understanding that Barbara is unable to be with us in person, so she will be presenting to us from a remote location. A member of the prestigious Speaker Hall of Fame, Barbara Glanz works with organizations that want to improve morale, retention, and service. Using her master's degree in adult learning, she has spoken on all 7 continents and in all 50 states. She has authored 14 best-selling business books, including The Simple Truths of Service, inspired by Johnny the Bagger, co-authored with Ken Blanchard, The Simple Truths of Appreciation, Care Packages for the Workplace, Dozens of Little Things You Can Do to Regenerate Spirit at Work, and 180 Ways to Spread Contagious Enthusiasm. She lives and breathes her personal motto, spreading contagious enthusiasm. She's been a popular speaker at the National SHRM conferences since 1997. After the session concludes, please be sure to complete the session survey in the app, and please join me in welcoming Barbara.
Hello and welcome from Sarasota, Florida. I am so sorry that I can't be with you in person. This is actually my 24th time to speak at the National SHRM Conference, and you truly are my favorite audience. So I have lung issues, and my doctors just advised me not to travel. But I am with you in spirit, and hopefully this will be a presentation that you'll be able to take a lot away from. So how many of you have felt like this in the last several days? I would say last 18 months, really. This pandemic has been a huge change for all of us. And one of the things that I've found during this change is that people have become much more confused and angry. And my newest book is called Exhausted, Confused, and Ticked Off: Hope for a New Beginning When Change Has Done You In. So where were you in March of 2020? And just think about what has happened over this last year. One of the things that Charles Darwin said many years ago was that it's not the strongest of the species that will survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most adaptable to change. And so as we look at hope for a new beginning when change has done you in, one of the main things I want to talk about today is the gift of change. And I want you to write this down, if you're able to, that all change comes bearing gifts. And this really is kind of the theme of our whole presentation today, because what I have found, and I've been through a lot of change in my life, I'm sure like most of you. At age 5, I was bitten by a dog and it got infected and they didn't think I'd live. And I had 2 plastic surgeries at Mayo Clinic. I've had happy changes like getting married and having children and going to college, and the wonderful job that I have now is speaking around the world, but also some tough ones. At age 27, I lost my father. At 62, my mother at 64. I found a lump in my breast, and our little boy died and was buried on Christmas Eve. So it was a tough time. And then at age 56, my husband of 34 years died of cancer. But I think probably the weirdest, then 2 years later, I moved to Florida where I knew no one. But I think the weirdest change of all for me is I've recently started dating. And that has been a very weird change. But I want you to think about all change comes bearing gifts. So would you, just for 1 minute or so, turn to a person near you and share, or if you're at home, write something down. One gift that came out of this pandemic. One thing you've either learned or you've done that was a gift during that time. So just take a minute or so right now. All right, when I talk about the gifts of change, I'm very clear, and in my own life as well, that many times these changes, it takes a long time to find the gifts in them. But I want to give you hope today and some skills and tools to understand the process of change, and then some coping mechanisms and some tools to help you have a different focus so that you can be much more able to find the gifts in change. So this is a quote from James Zulo. He says, "Suffering and change are a part of life, and we spend well over 50%, think about that, 50% of our lives today in change. Transition has become the norm and stability the exception." I recently heard a pastor say, and I love this, an interruption can become an introduction. And so the interruption of change can cause the gift to come of an introduction to something new. So let's go back for just a moment. Kinds of change in our lives. They're individual personal changes, they're organizational changes, they're technological changes, societal changes, they're cultural changes, and they're global changes. And look at what is happening in our world right now. So again, we're all overcome by change. But again, there are ways that we can get through this and realize that there are gifts that come. So I want to spend some time with you really focusing on the change process, because I think so many times we get bogged down in all these things going on in our lives. And if we can better understand the process of change, then we can know kind of where we are in that process with that particular change. It's not going to take the pain away, folks, but it does make it easier as we learn where we are and have a clarity about that. So one of the things in my adult learning experience, my master's is in adult learning, I love this Chinese proverb that the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their right name. And as we look at that, these really are the 4 stages of learning. And this has been really important to me in my work because it's clarified for a lot of people where they are. So the first stage is unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you're doing, and you don't even know that you don't know. The next stage is conscious incompetence. You know that you don't know how to do it. Then we get to conscious competence when we know what we're doing. And then finally, the last stage is unconscious competence, where it just happens without thinking. I love the analogy of driving a car. So when you were a baby, you didn't even know that you couldn't drive a car. And then you got to be a little toddler and you had a little steering wheel and you'd pretend that you were driving, but you knew you couldn't drive a real car. And then you got to like age 14, 15, 16 when you got your driver's permit. And do you remember how you thought about every single step when you were going to drive? You'd adjust the mirror and you'd adjust the seat and you'd put the clutch in real slowly. And how many of you learned on a stick shift? And then today, where are most of us? We are at unconscious incompetence. How many times have you gotten home from someplace and you don't even remember coming home? You know, and then when you have a policeman behind you, wow, that pulls you right back to conscious competence. So my belief for most of us, and in my case as well, when it comes to change, we've kind of been at that level of unconscious competence. So what I want to do today is bring you back to conscious competence so you really understand what's going on with change. So this is a model that I use whenever I speak, whether it's customer service or appreciation or employee engagement, because again, we need to think about the fact that the way we see things isn't necessarily the way other people see them. And with change, I'm going to talk with you about seeing with new eyes. So there's the way I see it, there's the way you see it, and then there's the way it really is with kind of a question mark. And so as we talk about what's happening in our lives during change, we're going to see it one way, and I'm hoping when you leave today, you'll begin to see it in a little bit different way. I always want to have some fun, so that's the way it is motto. And one of my favorites, you may call it a spare tire, but I call them dual side airbags. Bad dog. Not what he thinks. And I love this one for body language. And finally, I had my cartoonist do this for me. There is your house. The way you see it is a wonderful ranch house. Your appraiser sees it as a dog house. Your lender, one of many. Your buyer, a log cabin. And look how your tax assessor sees it. So we all see the world differently. Much of what I'm going to talk about with you today is all about choice. And again, this is part of every presentation I do, because I firmly believe that most of us in our world today do not get what I call in our guts, that we have choices. And so I want to have you leave really understanding that no matter what happens to us, no matter what happens to us in our lives, we always have a choice in how we respond. I love Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. It's a little book. I reread it every year. And in the book, he talks about how everybody in the concentration camps in World War II, he was Jewish, was in the same circumstances. They were all sick. They were all starving. They were all afraid. They were all separated from home and family. But some of those people became saints. And they would give their last piece of bread to a dying person. Other people, very same circumstances, became swine, and they would rip the bread out of the dying person's mouth because they couldn't fight back. And so his conclusion was, we cannot control most of our circumstances, but what we can always control is our response to them. So many changes are going to come into our lives, as they did in mine, that we can't control. But again, we can control our response to them. So this is a wonderful thought that we choose change. And when we choose change, it may be to take a new job. It may be a move. It may be getting married. It may be a choice to have children, maybe a choice to divorce. So we choose change, or it chooses us. And sometimes those things are the things that we can't control. So change can be the most exciting thing that happens because it's an introduction to something new. And it's the only way that you will grow as a person. And I think that's the key thing, that we do not grow in our comfort zones. We only grow when we're kind of forced out of them. So change just kind of comes in and explodes everything in our lives sometimes. And certainly that's happened in the pandemic. So this is a model I created many years ago because I wanted to measure the difference I could make. And this is a model for every interaction that we have with anyone. We can create for that other person a minus, a 0, or a plus. It is our choice whether we do that or not. And so as you're looking at that, I want to tell you a little story that I heard recently that I thought was so very powerful. So the average person in America lives to be about 78. And so that is 280,470 days for most of us. And so I saw a presentation where the person had a big bowl of marbles. And the idea was that you put a marble in for every day of your life. And on one side, there was a clear glass dish that said invested. And on the other side, there was a clear glass dish that said wasted. And so the challenge was that at the end of every day, we take a marble out of that bowl And if we've done something to make a difference for someone else, if we made some choices to help other people, we get to put the marble in the invested jar. If, on the other hand, everything that we've done has been focused on us and our pleasure and our needs, then we have to take that marble and put it in the wasted jar. And the idea is to look every day at where you are and how many marbles are over here invested and how many are wasted. And then the next week, this person did a wonderful visual. So he had 5 big, tall glass containers, and they all had sparkly blue marbles in them. So the first one was almost full, and that was where we are at age 20, how many marbles we have left. The next one was half of that. That's where we are at age 40. The next one was half of that. That's where we are at age 60. And then the last one just had a few marbles in it, and that was age 70. And it was really a powerful visual to think about how many days do we have left in that 78 years to make a difference for people. And so think about your marbles and what you're going to do. So in any change, we have the -0 plus again. So we can either be stuck in the past, which is a minus. We can simply be in survival mode, just getting through each day. Or we can be at a point where we are growing, acceptance and growth. And that's my hope for all of us as we finish this presentation, that we will understand the choices that we have to go from being stuck, what was the good old days, and this survival only. I mean, I think there's so much depression sometimes in the midst of change, and that is just barely getting up in the morning. But as we grow and accept what's going on and learn from it, then finding the gifts, we get to that plus stage. So this is another model I always use in everything I do, and it basically says every interaction has 2 levels, the business level and the human level, and that exactly applies to change. Because there is the business level, which is the process of change. And then there is the human level, which is all about our feelings in the midst of change. And we have to deal with both. But there are gifts that come out of this when we begin to get some clarity about what's happening within a change. So I always like to have fun with this model. So Federal Bureau of Feelings, sir, it seems that last night you neglected to ask your wife how her day was. You have the right to remain silent. Little business level. Great looking tie. And my favorite, Helen tries out her "not tonight, honey" nightgown. That's the human level. Finally, on the internet, nobody knows your dog. And then this one is my favorite of all. Help, we're lost, but our dad won't stop to ask for directions. And folks, that is true all over the world. As you heard, I've spoken on every continent, all 50 states. This is true. It must be in the male genes. The women laugh and the guys just kind of get a little smirk. So those are the human business models. And my final one, if this happens in your boardroom, then we know we've gone a little too far. The vice president in charge of sincerity, giving hugs. We sure don't want to do that now with COVID. So knowledge does not change behavior. I want to be really clear about that. Knowledge is the business level, facts. They do not change behavior. The only way, and we know this from all the adult learning, the only way that we get behavior change is reaching people right here at a heart level. So we have to talk about feelings and emotions as we talk and go through change. So the biggest thing we have to do in change is to look at what was. And let's look at our lives before the pandemic. We had that little block of time from about May to July. At least for me, I felt like I finished my shots in March. Then we were sort of thinking, wow, we're home free. And now we can go back to eating in the restaurants. And I got to travel to see my kids in Portland and Seattle. I'm in Florida, as I said. Those were big trips. But then all of a sudden, COVID sprung up again, the variant. And so we still are not back to our kind of normal. We'll probably never be back to normal as we knew it. But looking at what was, and then we have to name what is ending, because we have to let go of what was before we can move forward. So I created this model of change for myself because I wanted to have a very simple model of the process of change so that you would all understand exactly where you were in this process. So first of all, there's what was. And then there's this big lightning bolt of change. And it can be forced change or it can be chosen change. So which is harder? Of course, the forced change. The pandemic was a forced change. Chosen changes are things I mentioned earlier, like taking a promotion, getting married, having children, making a move, buying a bigger house. Those things are chosen changes, but they can still be tough. None of these things are easy. And then we get into this really icky place that I call the struggle. And that's where it's really tough. And the tougher the change, the more forced that it is, the longer this struggle period will probably go on. When our little boy died, it took me almost 5 years to be really whole again. You're never whole. You always have a hole in your heart, but it takes a long time. And then finally, we can get to the new beginning. And that is the growth period. But if you look at, I love this model because if you look at holding on to what was, that's the minus, stuck in the past. Oh, the good old days, the way things always were, blah, blah, blah. So one of the most difficult things we have to do in change is to let go of the past and move forward into the new beginning. So we're going to talk about each of those stages for a moment. So there can be any number of changes, but unless they're transitions, nothing will be different when the dust clears. So you can have lots of changes, but if you're still holding on to what was and not moving forward and realizing what you have to let go of, nothing will really change in the future. So there are lots of different names for that transition: dark night of the soul, struggle, bridge, process, turning point, passages, stages. Again, I like to call it the struggle because I think that's what it is for most of us. So I love this cartoon with Linus. He says, it's not that people are afraid of change or so in love with their old ways, but it's the place in between that people fear. It's like Linus, when his blanket is in the dryer, he has nothing to hold on to. So in that struggle, when we're letting go of the past, it's like being on the monkey bars. You cannot move forward unless you let go and move a hand here. And then you can't move forward again unless you let go and move a hand up here. So think about the monkey bars as you're going through that struggle. We let go a little bit at a time. And so many things change in that struggle period. When my husband died, for example, I had to let go of my identity of being a wife of being a part of a couple. I didn't get invited to couple things anymore. I had to let go of the security of having him take care of the books and pay all the bills. And then I even had to take out the garbage and do those chore things that you relied on someone else to do. So it was letting go a little bit at a time. But as long as we hang on to the past, and there are so many people, I think, in life like that, that just cannot let go of what was in order to move forward. And hopefully this understanding this process will help you all be better at that. So holding on or being stuck in the past, the minus, versus letting go and moving forward and growing. And so some of the stages that we go through in this struggle are denial, can't be happening to me, resistance, I'm not going to deal with this, confusion, why did this happen? Integration begins some of the healing, and then finally commitment so we can move forward. So I love this thought. Letting go leaves space for more to come. So once we let go of what was, then we're open, and an interruption becomes an introduction. We're open to new things in our lives happening. So do you want to talk about some coping skills? Do you have a support system? Do you have someone you can call in the middle of the night? My wonderful assistant, Laura, is always there for me. Do you have someone like that in your life? Do you belong to a church group or a book group or someplace where you are accepted, you can be vulnerable, and if there are many wonderful support groups as well. But to find that and have that in your life. So I want to go back just a moment, because I love the concept of the emotional bank account. This was something Stephen Covey talked about. So during the day in our lives, we get deposits and we get withdrawals. And I ask people all over the world, what do you get the most of? And everybody tells me withdrawals. So when you've had withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal, you are overdrawn. What can you do? Give yourself a deposit. And I want you to just write down, if you have paper right there, one or two things that you can do for yourself that will give you a deposit. You have permission, and in fact, orders to do that. Because if your emotional bank account is overdrawn, you're not going to be of help to anybody. And so one of my ways of giving myself a deposit is to go shopping. I know a lot of you guys would say, withdrawal, withdrawal, withdrawal. Also prayer. It can be calling someone who loves you. It can be walking outside around the building, taking a quick little walk. It can be buying yourself a treat, but something that you do just for yourself. And give yourself those deposits. You need them. You need them desperately. And then as you see people around you, if you see people, and you can usually tell because they look like this, give them a deposit. It can be a compliment. It can be asking a question. It can be offering to help. It can be a funny little Post-it note. It can be buying them a treat. Anything you can do to give them a deposit. Because this is interesting research, people. This is a brand new study. Before the pandemic, there were 46% of the people interviewed said they were lonely. That's 1 out of every 2 people. After the pandemic, 67% said they were lonely. So that's 2 out of every 3 people that you meet today or tomorrow are lonely. And so you can reach out, you can recognize them, you can see them, you can acknowledge them. And then don't forget yourself. One of my favorite stories, the bureau chief in the Department of Forestry, the state of Florida, is a client of mine. He called me one day just ecstatic on the phone. He said, Barbara, I have to tell you what I'm doing. When my own emotional bank account gets low, I send myself flowers. And he said, I don't put any card on it. And he said, all day everybody comes in. Oh, who sent you flowers? Is it your birthday? He said, I get more attention than you can possibly imagine. So it's okay to send yourself flowers. So I love this. You can tell her emotional bank account is overdrawn. Give her a deposit. So one of my friends, Kathy Dempsey, talks about release the past, reframe what happened, begin to look with new eyes, and refocus, find a new purpose. So let's go back. I'm sorry this is skipping, but give yourself permission for self-care. So important for us to care for ourselves. And so first of all, be gentle to yourself. Whenever I have someone who has a loss in their lives, that's the one thing I always say to them. Be gentle to yourself. Always be true to yourself. Don't worry about what other people are thinking, but be true to you and what you believe. And beliefs can be changed, by the way, folks. But be true to yourself. Give yourself permission to have fun. We need to have a lot more fun in our lives. And this is a really important one. Many people have been healed just watching funny movies, using humor to heal them. And so we all need a lot more fun in our lives. Watch and read things that bring you joy. What brings you joy? Not anybody else, but take some time. Again, this is part of giving yourself a deposit. It's self-care. What brings you joy? I don't care what anybody else thinks or anybody else is reading. If comic books bring you joy, read comic books. If watching soap operas brings you joy, watch soap operas. If you're a musician and certain kinds of music give you joy, listen to that kind of music. But take care of yourself. And then I love this, plan to be with people that you love or you want to get to know better. I try almost every week to try to have at least a long phone call or a lunch or something with somebody that I maybe have met quickly, but I want to get to know better, or to always connect with people that I love. And, we get so busy sometimes that we lose sight and lose track of those relationships that fill us up, and there's a wonderful thought that says every encounter that we have with another human being leaves both us and that other person on a higher or a lower plane. And aren't there people in your life, whenever you're around them, they just suck the energy right out of you? And then aren't there people that always make you feel just great? And the bottom line is, which one do you want to be? It's your choice, folks. I don't care what your personality is, how outgoing or introverted you are. You still have a choice. You can always appreciate and care for somebody else and let them feel special. So also find an exercise that you enjoy. I don't like to sweat, and so I'm a swimmer. I try to swim a mile at least 3 times a week in our pool here. But find an exercise, because it's good for our body, it's good for our soul, it's good for our emotions, and especially when you're in the midst of change, you need things that will help you physically and emotionally feel better. So focus on others. And again, this is hard. Sometimes in that struggle, we're so in focus, we're just at survival level, and I get that. I was at survival level a long time with some of the changes in my life. And that's okay, but it's just not staying there. It's trying little by little by little to move forward and let go little by little. And again, that growth, getting to that new beginning. So appreciate others. One of my books is called The Simple Truths of Appreciation, How Each of Us Can Help Choose to Make Other People Feel Better. And so I say in the book, appreciation is a free gift. Think about that. It's free. So just keep giving as much appreciation as you possibly can, because it's a free gift, and that will make the biggest difference for all the people that you encounter in a day. Join a support group. Talked a little bit about that. There's support groups for everything. When our child died, there's a group called Compassionate Friends, and it is available for anybody who's lost a child of any age. And I didn't ever attend any meetings because it was very new at that time. But to this day, I treasure their newsletter because it helps you understand there are other people going through the same things that you are. So find a support group. And then most importantly, have compassion for others. I found a quote recently that I just love, and it says, "Never judge a person's story by the chapter you find them in." Never judge a person's story by the chapter you find them in. And that just so resonated with me because there were chapters in my life I wouldn't have been very likable. And in fact, there were chapters I didn't even like myself very much. So this has been a really wonderful reminder that wherever we meet someone, don't make any judgments, because we need to hear, everybody has a story. We need to hear their whole story. So begin to see with new eyes, when we talked about the way it is model, instead of the way you've always seen it. Begin to look at maybe the way it really is and listen to how somebody else sees it. But begin to look with new eyes. So change or modify your expectations. And this is a big one. I used to have very high expectations, especially for myself and then for my children. But those were exploded when things happened that were out of my control. And I realized that I had a neighbor who said, "I have no expectations. So everything that happens is usually good." I couldn't get to that point, but I could change my expectations and realize that I was aiming way too high. Reframe your beliefs, because beliefs can be changed. And then finally, the biggest thing I found in all the losses, especially in my life, were to treasure the good memories. You know, it's so easy to focus on the loss, what we're missing, instead of what we had, the blessing of what we had. And I look back on, for example, my marriage of 34 years. I look back on, I lost a job that I loved. And I lost that job. And that was heartrending for me, because it meant I was losing the people that work there. I was losing the security of that job, of the joy of that job. And yet, because of that, doors opened, things happened that I could move forward and find an even greater joy in my life. But I still treasured the good memories. It took time. You know, we have to get through those tough feelings, and we have to really let go of the hard ones. But again, treasure the good memories. And by the way, someone, when my husband died, gave me a photo album. And she said, "Put all the pictures of you and Charlie in this album." And so when I started to put it together, I realized there were hardly any pictures of the two of us, because he always took the pictures. So one of the things, I walk on the beach a lot. One of the things that I do when I see someone taking a picture of another person or a family, I always stop and ask, "Would you like me to take a picture of all of you?" And that was kind of a legacy to my husband. So good memories are a treasure. Now, I have a male friend who's been through a lot of difficult change, and he wrote down what some of his coping mechanisms were. So for your guys out there, these may be things that will resonate more with you. So separate areas of your life into watertight compartments. And he had all these different compartments, and he didn't allow them to bleed over into the other ones. He said, "I always maintain a strong work focus." And obviously, I think that kept him from thinking about his feelings. So for him, that worked. Continue projects that provide continuity, and complete projects that provide closure. So he was looking for things that he could say he got done when he was too overwhelmed to focus on the losses in his life and the emotions. Perform activities that give you comfort and peace. And that's kind of like we talked about in the self-care. He was a golfer, so that gave him comfort and peace. I think for most of us, that would give us a lot of angst, but he liked that. And then make logical assessments of the facts. Doesn't that sound like a guy? Very, very left brain. So the process for him, the factual part of it, the business level, was the most important way that he could get to the new beginning. But at some point, he still did have to deal with his emotions and feelings. So I want to talk about some ideas to facilitate behavior in your organization. And again, everything we've talked about pretty much so far has been focused on personally getting through change. And by the way, I want to share with you one thing that I forgot at the time when we talked about the marbles, when we talked about the 280,470 days that we have. Listen to this. We spend 26 years of that 78 years, 26 years sleeping. We spend 15 years working. We spend 8 years watching TV, probably Netflix for most of us during the pandemic. We spend 4.5 years eating. That one really made me smile. We spend 6 years on social media. Imagine your life before social media. We spend 2 years shopping. I like that one. We spend 4 years in our cars. And I'm sure some of you spend more than that. And finally, we spend a whole year looking for things we've lost. That made me smile. So in your organization, there are people that have different change styles, and recognizing that, what style they are, and also what you can do to help them get through the change. So the stabilizer likes things the way they are. They are holding on to what was. They don't want to move. So you've got to give them time, and you've got to listen, not judgmentally, but listen to what their needs are. And then all of the things that we've already talked about on a personal level, you can share with your staff or your coworkers. The hedger is very analytical. The hedger has to have a lot of time to think it through. Think it through. The energizer's full of enthusiasm, and they're a cheerleader for change. They love change. How many of you out there love change? I don't think a lot of us love change, because change is hard. It is hard. Then there's the dominator, who is very results driven, and they're the drivers of change, but it always has to be their way. And they get in the way of many healthy changes that can be occurring in your organization. So small changes have a big impact on a big problem. All transitions, James Zulo says, all transitions begin with an ending, and hopefully end in a new beginning. And that's what I'm desiring for all of you, that the changes in your life, as you think about the process of change. And let's go back for just a moment, because I want to look at this whole model of change. So you see what was, and then there's either forced change or chosen change. And there are two more categories there. They can be predictable or unpredictable. And so there's a continuum. A chosen change that's predictable is probably the easiest change. You know, taking a new job, moving, buying a bigger house, you know, having a child. Those are chosen and predictable, so we can get prepared for those. But they're also the most difficult changes that are forced and unpredictable. And that is a pandemic. It's the loss of someone in your life. It's the loss of a job. It's a divorce. It's all those things that are forced and unpredictable. So think about a change that you're experiencing right now. And think about whether it was forced or chosen, predictable or unpredictable. And that's the first step in looking at what was, and then what is this kind of lightning bolt of change. Then the struggle is where you're trying to figure it all out. You're trying to get through. It's like I used to feel when I was in the midst of the struggle, it was like cobwebs. I was just trying to find my way. And give yourself credit for small steps. The first time that I could go back to the doctor's office after our little boy had died, to see women with babies and who were pregnant and had little toddlers, and it was devastating for me. And it took me a long time to be able to do that. But when I did it, it was hard, really hard. But that was my first step toward growth. After my husband died, when I finally, and it took me a couple years to do this, to go to a movie by myself, because I knew I would feel like left out and lonely, because that's something we like to do. But the first time that you do something like that, it's a baby step. And so be proud of yourself as you're in that struggle when you make that little baby step. And then begin to look at and think about, you know, what do I have to let go of? Because as long as you're holding on back there to what was, you're stuck. So what do you, in the change that you find yourself right now, what do you have to let go of? Sometimes it's letting go of fear, you know, the monkey bars, remember, and letting go the fear of what's in between. And sometimes it's just fear of what the future may hold. But we always know it's going to be better when you get over here than if you're stuck way back here, because there's nothing you can do about that. And so when you get to that new beginning, then celebrate. And it's very exciting when you look back and you see what you've gone through. And I kept a journal, which is a great thing to do. And I just wrote to God. It wasn't for anybody else to see. In fact, I wouldn't ever want anybody else to see it. But when I did write the Exhausted, Confused, and Ticked Off book, it was really helpful for me to go back to that journal and some of the things that I was experiencing. So this is the most important thing I'm going to share with you today. And again, my friend, male friend that had gone through a lot of change, helped me with this. We call it the control inventory. And if you will keep this model, and every time you have a significant change in your life, if you will sit down and write the answers to these questions, I guarantee it will help you get through that struggle period much faster. So first of all, what do you have control over? And what don't you have control over? You know, we focus so many times worrying and stewing and being overwhelmed by things we have no control over. So when you isolate those and write them down, it makes them much more real. One of the things we learned in adult learning was that when we can write something out and actually see it in front of our eyes, it becomes a lot more real. It doesn't make it a lot easier, but it makes it real, and then it helps you again to move forward. So what do you have control over? Like when my husband died, I had control over still owning our home. I had control over still taking care of our children. I had control over a lot of things that we had planned and done together. I didn't have control over many things that happened in his work and the health issues that he had and so forth. And then the next one, again, is so powerful. What has changed in my life and what hasn't changed? So I found many things had changed, but also when I started writing them down, I realized many things had not changed. I was still the same person. I still had the same skills. I still had my children. I still had my friends. I still had my house. There were many things that had not changed, but we focus so much often on what has changed. And it was a biggie. It's a biggie to lose someone in your life. I'm not discounting that. It takes a lot of time to get to that other side. But smaller things in your life. When I lost my job, what had changed? I didn't have the job anymore. I didn't have the income. I wasn't going to be with my colleagues that were there. But what hadn't changed? I still had all my skills and intellectual property, and I had my excitement and my enthusiasm, and I had all the things that were the most important for me. And then finally, what do I have to let go of? And that's a critical one. Once you isolate and write down and truly look at what do I have to let go of in order to move forward? And so many people can't deal with that. So they just stay stuck in the past, holding on to the past. So, and then what do I carry forward? And again, there's so many things that move forward with us. And so looking at this control inventory, I want to suggest to you, if you would like a copy of this, the handout, or if you would like to get my free email newsletter, if you will text Glanz, 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 at 22828 and say newsletter or handout, Glanz, Glanz, 22828. So let's go back to the whole theme of today. All change comes bearing gifts. May take longer to see them, but they are there. So I want to go back just a moment because we skipped a slide that was really important. So these were some of the gifts that I found as I went through a lot of these changes. And so the first one was Redefined Priorities. And my guess, folks, is that going through this pandemic, no one that I have talked to has not told me that they have changed their priorities. Because you realize, especially when you're in lockdown for a year, you realize what is truly important in your life. So many people are leaving jobs that they hated or are choosing because they've enjoyed working at home and being closer to their families, choosing to stay at home to work instead of going back into the office. So many people have realized how important their friends and their children were to them, especially when they couldn't see them for an entire year. And what we enjoyed, like I missed the movies, so I spent a lot of time watching Netflix. And that was a substitute for me for going to the movies. But redefine priorities. New and deeper relationships. And this one I think is so important. One of the things I did during the pandemic that I loved, I had heard a speaker friend, Michelle Poehler, talk about doing a 100-day project. And so I decided I would do a 100-day project during the pandemic. And it was doable in 100 days. It wasn't like forever. So every day for 100 days, I tried to call or write, if I couldn't get a phone number, somebody who had been important in my life at some point. Many of these people I had not talked to for years and years and years. I called old high school friends. I called teachers, old teachers. I'm old. I called people from college. I called friends that I had met in Illinois that when I moved to Florida, I lost touch with. I even found an old boyfriend in California. So I had such a wonderful time of reconnecting with people, again, who were important in my life. And it was just a lovely, lovely gift, I think, to them, I hope, as well as to me. And so think about what might you do as a 100-day project. And I put a lot of marbles in my invested jar on those days. Depth of character. Folks, we do not grow without suffering. If we stay in our comfort zones, we are not going to grow. We only grow through suffering, change and suffering. I used to teach high school and college English and drama, and there is a wonderful passage in Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, and it talks about, and I love this with high school kids because they're in the midst of so much change and hormones and all kinds of things going on. But it talked about the deeper that sorrow carves into our being, we have that much more capacity to experience joy. If we go through life and we just have little bitty sorrows, we're just going to be able to have little bitty joys. And it was such a concrete way for these, especially these young people, to realize that those deep sorrows can be filled with joy. And so again, we don't grow without that. One of my personal beliefs is we respect people, we admire people for their strengths, but we love people for their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. It's hard to love somebody who's got it all together all the time. But it's real easy to love someone who shares their vulnerabilities because then they're just like me. And so again, I want you to leave finding your strength in your vulnerability and connecting that with other people. So depth of character. And finally, more joy and fulfillment in life. You know, we spend half our lives in our workplaces, so they should be places of joy and caring and encouragement. And if your workplace is at home, your families should be places of joy and caring and encouragement. And by the way, I love that the root word of encouragement is cur, C-O-E-U-R, the Latin word for heart. So when we encourage, we are doing this from the heart. So all change comes bearing gifts. And Joan Chittister says, change dusts off our dreams and explodes us into new beginnings. And those changes do explode us, sometimes not the way we want, but we can choose to find those gifts and move forward so we will have a new beginning. So this is one of my favorite all-time quotes from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep, loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. And remember that beautiful people do not just happen. They've known defeat and suffering and struggle, and that's all of us in this life. But they've come out of the depths. They've found those gifts. And the gifts are compassion and gentleness and love and all those gifts that we can think about from change. So now more than ever, with all the changes occurring around us, we need to focus on finding the gifts in change to lead us to a new beginning. And so I want to end with a thought from a dear friend of mine, Og Mandino. If you'll close your eyes, I end every presentation with this. He says this: beginning today, treat everyone you meet, loved one or stranger, friend or foe, as if they were going to be dead at midnight. Extend to each person you meet, no matter how trivial the contact, all the care and the kindness and the understanding and the love that you could muster. And do so with no thought of any reward. Your life will never be the same again. And folks, I hope you've gotten some things today that your lives will never be the same again. Thank you. God bless. Have fun in Las Vegas. Bye-bye.
Thank you to Barbara. Thank you to you all here live and to those that joined virtually. That concludes tonight's session. Thank you.